this on, Joe? The webcast? We're good,
So,
okay.
So we are now being
We're happy.
taped.
excellent. So, good afternoon. For the webcast, for people viewing the webcast, this is Constance Steinkuhler Squire, and we're about to get started with our Federal Games Guild or working group, depending on what you want to call it. I'll go with Guild. With our Federal Games Guild meeting, we took some time off in the summer, and now we're reconvening. Today we have a guest speaker presenting on best practices in games for impact, which I'm really excited about. I want to say a little bit about that, but first let me explain to you a little bit of housekeeping. So we haven't set dates for October and November yet, but the Woodrow Wilson Center has actually graciously volunteered to host our meetings over lunch, and we'll talk a little bit about the focus of those meetings or some suggestions where I think we might drill down a little bit more deeply on Games for Impact. We'll talk about that after we hear about best practices. I, for one, have my own announcements, and that's that as of August 27th was my last day in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I'm back at the university in my academic role, and dare I say, blissfully living with my 2.5-year-old and 5-year-old again. So they're happy, and I'm very happy as well. I will, however, be around at least through December to see things through. And there is, we are already in conversation about the next person to take my post within OSTP. So I will stick around to transition that over and hand the baton to my predecessor. Is that the right one? Yeah. Successor. I was like, predecessor.
You'll be there.
That would be backwards. All right, you're going to have to forgive me because you know what? I got on a plane this morning at 5 in the morning to get here. So if there's a little bit of bleary-eyed, you know why. But I am very, very glad to get here. Our last meeting was in New York, and it was hugely successful. We had a massive turnout, if you recall, for those of you who were there. How many of you were actually there in New York? Yeah, I mean, they had to move rooms. We expected about 70 external people, and instead we had over 300. So I think one thing that we need to think about is how do we, between now and possibly May, think about an event. I would suggest that we do it in D.C. to make our lives easier, because many of us can't travel due to budget constraints within agencies. But thinking about possibly doing a kind of DC-focused event, DC-located event, that may, instead of, in New York, we really focused on various presenters and content for our benefit that would actually improve our understanding of, say, game production or issues like that. And instead, I think we ought to focus on organizing around our interests within this games working group and trying to connect ourselves to more doers within this space so that we can pull on them when it comes time to do things like, review grants for you or get them on the telephone and help solve some problems or questions around platforms, etc. So we'll stay tuned on that. But in the meantime, I want to get to some content. So does everyone here know Drew, or does anyone here know Drew? I just assume everyone in the world knows Drew Davidson. So Drew Davidson runs ETC over at the Carnegie Mellon University. He is now the director officially. Acting director of their games program. For those of you who do not know him, he's one of the most connected people I know, and he'll be reporting today on a project that we've had in the works for several months. And that was that, if you recall, early on, when we first formed this working group, one of the main action items on our list was to craft a short document of advisory kind of heuristics around what are best practices in games. Most of us have games in our portfolio not by design, or at least not originally by design. So understanding how to invest in games practically, but also some of the shocking news around games, for example, of what portion of the budget may be art, like how to think about the game design process, etc. It's not a simple task. So we, as of July, put together an academic consortium of about, I'd say, 20 universities. We had an incredibly productive meeting in the White House where we narrowed to action items, and we'll be very quickly following up on that as soon as, I believe, November, beginning of November in Pittsburgh. But one of the very, very first tasks we did within that academic consortium was to put together an action group to draft and then vet the document that Drew will be presenting today, which is Best Practices for Games for Impact. And we'll be able to circulate a digital version of that document to the entire group. Oh, and I should have said, I'm not sure if I said it yet or not, but we are webcasting, which means that content will be available after the fact. Normally we phone people in, and thanks to a new and more technologically advanced venue, we can actually get that distribution broader, because if you've been on the other end of that phone call when we dial people in, it's pretty much terrible. Yeah, I'll admit it. It's pretty much a terrible experience. So I think this is going to dramatically increase the quality of the experience for everyone who's not here. Anything I'm missing? Any other major announcements? Who did the coolest thing in August? I know August is like the time that we all do something great, right? Everyone's like, I'm not telling.
Not on a webcast.
Not on a webcast. I'll tell you later, girl. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Drew, if you don't mind, and we'll
Not at all.
just focus on that.
Okay, cool. Thanks, everyone. Just as Constance said, I'm at Carnegie Mellon, and one of the things she tasked me with was to sort of just help ride herd on the academic consortium, the 20 members, to just try to pull this together. So this sort of is a collection of best practices and knowledge from the group as a whole. And we also, while we were doing it, I think everybody was also spitting it out to their industry colleagues as well. So what we were really just trying to do was help collect something in some form. I remember when Constance and I originally talked about this, it was going to be a one-pager. It's 5 pages now as a PDF. We have a PDF and then this PowerPoint just to help sort of break it up for a quick little presentation. But a huge thank you to all the academic consortium. This is sort of like all of us together, particularly Tracy Fullerton, Mary Flanagan, and Scott Osterweil, respectively from University of South California, Dartmouth University, and MIT. They helped with the editing and the synthesis as we got all the input and feedback from our consortium fellows. So, diving right in. What we were trying to do is think about when you would like to make a game that has something beyond the purpose of just being fun. So something that you want to have an impact on, have some sort of transformational goals that a player comes out of above and beyond, like, yay, I love the game. So taking that idea combined with just what it takes to make a game in general, this is kind of where we pulled together this document for everybody. This is a high-level overview. Again, Constance was just sort of saying a lot of us end up with games on our plate and we're not 100% sure what to do with that. And so we were just trying to give you a quick, brief overview. Of course, one of the things that was fun with working with an academic consortium was we could have easily given you a book or two. So this sort of represents a high-level overview. But like game development is definitely a combination. It's very interdisciplinary. And then on top of that, with Games for Impact, you want to have a purpose above and beyond that. That requires that sort of subject matter expertise where you're trying to pull somebody out of either physics, because that's what you're trying to do, or assessment, because you want to at least prove that something's happening there, or civics, and then just how you then determine what you're doing in there is a whole another level of expertise. You want to have behavior shift, not just learning goals. And so for us, as we were starting to tackle this topic for you all, it's just like thinking about games in general is a tricky thing, and then thinking about a game that has a purpose beyond that, that you hope there's some sort of transformational behavior coming out of that, is particularly challenging, but I also think particularly effective and rewarding. So we really tried to break it down. What I loved, this was graphically designed by one of our graduate students at Carnegie Mellon, is just the process of what you do from beginning to end. So it does sort of try to walk you through what you'd want to think about. So again, as you start it, why would you even want to think about using a game? Some of the important questions we think people should ask is sometimes a game's not the right thing. I mean, it's fun and all, but maybe it's better to just do it with text or with a quick short film. But thinking about it in terms of games is like, what are the values you're trying to incorporate? What do you want your game to be getting at? What are your goals? Because that's one of the best things games can do is like problem solve towards those goals. And then really is a game the best way to get there? Because if maybe you have a goal that it might be better to plan out and scope workshops as opposed to getting a game out there. If a game seems to be a great way to do it, then how do you getting into like what's your goal and how do you want the player or players to be transformed? How do you want them to reflect the success of that goal? And then very, very importantly, all the assessment experts in the academic consortium is just like think from the start, like how do you want to assess what's going on so that you can have so you can show that there was an impact. And then finally, with game designers in-house, what's the best way a game can do this for you? So just like high-level questions there. And then as we start digging in, like a game designer might start going, well, here are the types of questions I'd start asking if I were thinking of tackling this. And sort of like, what's your target market? What do you know about those people and their play patterns? Like I was just talking to somebody about Facebook, and like, can we break down what players do on Facebook? Both, time spent, the demographics of who's doing what. So that's something really important to consider. In terms of design, one of the things that designers emphasize is often they get pulled in after there's an idea, and they think it's always better to have the team together from the get-go. And so, like, who's your designer, and are you willing to have them engaged throughout? Similarly, having the learning and assessment experts there. One of the things we've noticed a lot with sort of games for impact or learning is it's sort of like, here's this game and it's a lot of fun, let's try to sprinkle learning on it. Or vice versa. It's like, well, we've got some really good core learning metrics, we'll just use the game to make it fun. And I think both of those things are fraught with problems. And so, like, similarly, not only having a designer on board, getting your learning and assessment experts on board so that they're there throughout is really important. And then one of the things we practice and preach around the ETC at Carnegie Mellon is test, 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 test. I think for those of you who were there in New York, I thought Nick Fortuno did this great job about game design being iterative, and he was using his metaphor of like it's a dart, and you're in the dark room, and you slowly get closer to the dartboard as you iterate towards it. So that's all what testing helps you do, and we'll talk about it more deeply. And then something I think in terms of just the game development process, like who's responsible for the quality of the game, how it looks, how it plays, how it actually performs in terms of software development, and then concurrently who's in charge, who's really the one responsible for the values you want, whether it's learning or civics, how are these going to be expressed through the game? So this is something just to consider again up front as you're thinking about a game. Key concepts in game development, rapid prototyping. We love rapid prototyping. That's like failing your way to the good idea. Build a lot of early versions fast. There's a great talk that happened at the Game Developers Conference a couple years ago called Let's Talk More Rock. And the idea was, historic design is sort of like, we've got a great idea, let's talk about it, let's talk about it, let's talk about it, let's talk about it. Now let's try to make something. And in terms of rapid prototyping, you kind of flip that. You go, we've got a great idea. Rock, 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 make something, make something, make something, make something. Oh, does it work? Does it work? Okay, rock, rock, rock. So make stuff more and then look at what you're doing later, as opposed to try to do a lot of ideation up front. So part of what's great about games is you can make playable prototypes pretty quickly, either paper prototypes or just something in Flash or HTML. Again, play testing with your demographic audience is really important. Iteration ties right in with rapid prototyping. Just be aware of that. One of the things I've noticed when working with funders is they're used to having it be more linear. It's like, so we're going to start here, we're going to get to an end, and we know where we are. And oftentimes with games, there's going to be a lot of changes throughout the process as you find that the game's not engaging or immersive or it's not hitting your learning goals. And so you keep tweaking it. And that's actually part of the process. A lot of our consortium members were really wanted to stress the user research and game analytics. The games can track everything. So if you're really careful about considering that, you can have useful data. We made a game once called Peacemaker, at the Carnegie Mellon. This was several years ago. That was sort of like set in the Middle East. So you choose to play as a Palestinian president or as an Israeli prime minister and keep the peace. And it's a hard game to win. But we were actually trying to help people assess that, and we were just tracking everything. So that was a lot of noise in the data. Polish is really important. One of the things that we try to do is as you iterate, you slowly start, like we find it very important to make a game polished towards the end. It really, really matters. That extra little push can make the game be much more engaging, make people play it more, just address it more readily. Interdisciplinary, cannot stress this enough. You want everybody involved, and it's so easy to try to cut a corner in terms of budget or time. But one of the things that I think makes games work and sing is when the interdisciplinary team's together. One of the things that we love about games is they create experiences. People have experiences in games. Constance has done tons of work online about the experiences kids have, and she's done some great work about how they actually basically use the scientific method to explore their gameplay experiences. So it enables things just through the context and values at play for students to start learning things. And a thing that games are just great at is it's all about exploration. So players can discover their interests and motivations through the act of playing. And so by a well-designed game and then well-designed learning or impact goals, you can actually help them get there on their own, which is very, very powerful learning. Like Jim G at Arizona State has this great little aphorism he's been saying lately, I know, is like games are just great learning design. We already know what good learning design is, and it's not schools right now, but games actually are really well designed for learning. The game design process here. One of the things, again, like assessment's so important. You want to consider that from the get-go. A big mistake that often happens is like, well, think about assessment later. We'll get that at the end when we're done. But if you can think about it early, you can design for it so that you're measuring it accurately. And that helps you set your goals so that you can design it so that players have direction and they can embody what they would like to do. A pet peeve of mine is a lot of people like games because they're fun. I like games because they're challenging. I think that's what makes games really effective, is they're actually hard. And so kids struggle and struggle and struggle. In a well-designed game, they're going to keep struggling until they figure it out. And so I think that's great if you're thinking about how to have a learning goal and like really challenge them appropriately. Consequences are really important. That people want to feel like they matter. And that's what games are so important. They feel like they have agency, and what they're doing has some sort of impact in that experience. Rewards are something that you want to have met with successes. A big thing you've probably heard maybe is like gamification and badges, using games or badges to help just sort of track learning goals. And this can get problematic if that's the only thing you're doing, is using badges to kind of go, look, I collected all 4. You want to think about how those challenges ramp up towards what the rewards are. And I think all of what I've just discussed are about how players get motivated. And having them motivated is something that happens inherently in a well-designed game. And I think I also would say it happens inherently in well-designed learning experiences because you're just really, really engaged. And what games do really well is not just one way to get to success. Like they have multiple paths, because failure is kind of fun if you're slowly starting to see what's happening and you can kind of get a clue about what you're doing. Last but not least, evaluations. You want to be able to use all of the above to help track what's going on and get a sense of what they're learning and if it's having an impact and if they're actually going to be sort of transformed by playing the game. And so that's something we thought was really important pulling together. Oh, this was fun. We stuck this in just for you all. Call for proposals. Like I was saying earlier, the initial proposed concept will definitely evolve, and that's actually a good thing. Sometimes I've noticed with funders or sponsors that that's something that's scary as well, as they say, like, wait a sec, we were going to just do it, and something's probably good going to happen out of it if you enable it to evolve. Like Constance was saying earlier, project timeline should allow the chance to revise the game. As you want to be able to review it and play it. So sometimes it can be, I've dealt with people whose backgrounds are mostly in television, and they're so used to like, don't make anything till the script's done. We'll get the script right, then we'll shoot. And so that they were telling us to basically treat our game design like a script and not make anything till we were done with our game design. And that's not how games work. You really have to play them to figure out if they're working. So have that opportunity in terms of timeline to review and revise. Building on what she said earlier too, vetting teams, a great way to vet teams is to call on people who have experience in this background. So the academic consortium can be your friend in terms of like evaluating what people are saying on their RFPs or CFPs in terms of the timeline, their schedule, their budget. Another great thing to do is if you're trying to do a game, get somebody to play the games that they've made before, so you can get a sense if they actually have a sense of games in general, or like we were just talking earlier, do they understand how to make a serious game on Facebook? Do they have any background in that? And one of the things we've noticed too with funders is they want to make a one big game. There's like a pull of like, let's make the blockbuster. I cannot tell you how many people have come to us going, so we want to do a kids-based, massively multiplayer online game. We've got $10,000, and we want it to last for them from K through 12th grade, and that I don't even know how to tackle that design challenge. But lots of small chunking of games could be just as effective, and you could string them together in some really interesting ways. Production costs. Again, these are estimates, and we wanted these in here so you got a sense of what professionally developed games are cost. And so they don't they vary widely. We were talking to colleagues internally where it's like, oh, I made a game for a lot less than this. But I was like, but you did it with students, didn't you? And that's, that can work. But if you're really trying to get a team up to sort of guarantee a result, while the cost may vary a lot, one of the things we want to do is just give you this information of current costs of games. And these don't necessarily take into university overhead, associated research or assessment costs. These are really just production costs. So it goes from like a playable paper or concept So this is something where you can either it's online, really brief, or it's just I can show you the game. 25,000 to 75,000. Working with a professional developer. A digital prototype, somewhere between 100 and 150,000. Getting something up in a browser, so like HTML5, 150 to 200,000. Facebook games can be about $250,000 if you want to take advantage of the social features, which you probably should if you're doing a Facebook game. Mobile games about the same range, so getting something on iOS or Androids to get a professionally developed game. PC games can be a lot more expensive as you start thinking about all the different variations you'd want to have on there. Multi or cross-platform games, so trying to do something transmedia, which is really hot right now. It's like I have it on my phone and I can get back on Facebook and then I can log on through Xbox. Those cost a couple million. And then that classic multiplayer game that just always online and they can learn from K through 12. That's probably 10 million plus to do that. And then there's long-term supports in terms of just technology supports, like you have to pay for the servers and the bandwidth, and usually with online games you have to keep updating content. So they can come with those risks. And I kid you not, a lot of people come to us and go, I have $10,000 and I want to do an MMO. Something else that varies widely are possible platforms to consider. And each can have its own potential impact or reach for the game. So like Unity is a very popular one right now. They let people use it for free. They have ports so you can get it up to iOS, get it online, have it be its own download. So it has a lot of usefulness right now. Flash has been great. It's sort of phasing away. But we thought a lot of people are still using Flash a lot, so we wanted to put it up there. XNA is a Microsoft thing for Xbox or PCs. HTML5 if you want to get something on any web browser. Like Google's doing a lot of great work in this area. Unreal is probably the top of the line in terms of game engines, and they are very supportive about letting people use it for nonprofit. iOS and Android, their own bailiwicks. With Apple, you get into that great little curated garden. And it'll probably work on every device. With Android, you get it into more hands, but there's, 30 different Android devices now. Probably more. I'm dating myself. So there's tons of Android devices. That's something to consider. Like we did a project recently where we did Android because we thought more kids would have it. But then we had to really be clear about our technical requirements because you can't play on every phone. Board games can be actually a really useful platform. Getting people, I've seen some studies out there just how kids can engage, and there's an interesting social face-to-face socialization around board games. It's really powerful. There are a lot of open source engines out there to consider. Quality varies from like great, it's fun to it's not going to do what you need. C4's the Cry engine is sort of like Unreal, very polished professional engine. The AR toolkit we wanted to put in there, just a lot of people were noticing augmented reality type games. So AR is augmented reality. So getting your phone or an Android and being out and about in a space, location-based media is something that's been hot now, particularly with learning, I think. So you use those possible platforms, and here's the stages of game development. There's that ideation stage where you're brainstorming, you're looking at your players, you're trying to think about your assessment. You want to think about that early, get everything together in documentation. Then you go into your prototyping where you're just experimentally developing the game and working your way through the gameplay elements and trying things out. While you're doing that, you should be doing user research, not just playtesting with them, but also who are your users and what are their issues and their values. And production for us, we wanted to just sort of call that out. That's when you kind of have a sense of you've done all that and you're really going to make that full game now. And those are the costs above, is like making that full game. Sometimes just prototyping something, you can get we've done a lot with funders where we prototype something where we can show like a vertical slice of here's the experience and it does work. We can show one level where it teaches a core math skill. And if you start stringing this together with others, we think it could be a full game. Key milestones are alpha, beta, and gold in the game development industry. Alpha is basically all the code's there. It's probably buggy, but you can basically get a sense of what the game's like. Beta is you're almost done, and you have a sense of key bugs that might be breaking it. And gold's like, we're ready, we're public. We're ready to go. Release and support is really important, particularly for online games. Once you go online, you need to keep supporting that. Because the server's going to be there, communities. One of the things we've noticed is anytime we do something that has a community component, if there's not an intention and attention to the community after it goes live, the whole community just goes away because they just feel like they're not being listened to. So it's just really important, we think, particularly with online games. And iOS has gotten a little crazy with the expected updates. Like they just like, I bought this game and I'm just waiting for the next 20 levels, and then update. And again, we wanted to pull out testing because we thought of it was so important, how that helps you iterate. The three major types of testing are play testing, focus testing, and beta testing. Play testing is really just getting it in front of people and seeing if it works as a game. Focus testing is doing that specifically with your demographic audience. Like sometimes our students struggle with that if the age range goes weird. Like I have grad students, so it's like, oh, we're going for kindergartners. They might vaguely recall what that is. But they should really be testing with kindergartners, not with each other. And they even struggle more when it's like we made a couple games where it was for senior citizens, and their assumptions were so far off it was actually comical. So like, but you do want to, like they were making a rehab game for people 50 and above who were recovering from knee surgery, and so they had this whole idea is the longer you played, the more lush the environment got. So there was these rewards that were going to be very sort of visual and audio driven. And as they were testing, they found out the testers didn't even notice. They were just so happy it kept count. Because then they had like a digital verification that they could tell the nurse, I did 20 reps. So back off. And beta testing is when you hit that phase where you're just trying to fix everything else so you get ready to ship it. And these three things, yeah, please do. Well, that's on this side over here. That would be assessment, analytics, and evaluation. So So the left side of the column is really about the experience and its effectiveness, and then on the right side of this image, the assessments where that's that modeling that you're trying to do to measure progress in terms of whatever competence they are. If they're learning goals, if they're civic goals, if they're behavioral modification, that's where you're trying to plan that through your assessment design. Analytics is using that design to determine the data you want to collect. So you're not collecting everything because you could drown in that data. But that helps you then start getting those variables so you can say, kids are learning or kids are changing their behavior out the game. And then evaluation, just determining the long-term impact. If by playing the game, does it have an impact? One of the things that's sort of like a bugaboo I've seen at conferences is when we talk about games for learning or impact, a lot of people, a sort of tricky question is like, so Grand Theft Auto, where you can play as a guy who sleeps with a hooker and then kills her and takes your money back. What is that teaching kids? If games can teach. So what are they learning? And so my answer to that is often what we found as we've tried to do learning games is it's all about putting it in the right context. So games in and of themselves don't teach behaviors outside of them necessarily. So like putting it in a classroom with a teacher to help remediate helps. So when you're just playing a game for fun, one of Valerie Shute from Florida did this wonderful study with a game called World of Goo, which is like a physics construction game. And she found this sort of counterintuitive result where really good game players were so good at blasting through levels just because they were used to trying anything that they weren't getting the underlying physics concepts because the game was not sort of built for that. But people who were new to the game actually were able to start understanding the physics behind the construction they were doing because they had to figure it out to succeed at the game. And so that's something that's sort of like balance as you think about how you value what they're doing. All right, some common mistakes and misconceptions. We wanted to throw this in there. Like I said, just one big game is a very attractive thing to do, like put all your eggs in one basket. Or that one game could be the solution to all the goals you have. Sometimes maybe it is a game with, I think some of the stuff that PBS is doing is really clever where they have like the TV, like I know they were using with, this is actually Sesame Street, the electric company, was doing some great stuff where they'd have a show in and you could go online to help the characters in the show and then you were playing, with the electric company, so it was phonics type games, but it got kids really moving back and forth, so the game and the show really worked well together. Another mistake is going to games just because it's fun or just trying to add layers of fun to get kids engaged. I think challenge is what's more important. Something we've noticed is testing doesn't happen, so that it doesn't iterate. Testing's so easy to cut out of the budget. It's like, oh, we're running out of time. We'll worry about that later. Obverse of that is sort of feature creep by you do testing and you want to just take all the input and do everything. So that can be hard too when you're sort of trying to keep, like one of the things that when we work with clients and with our students is what's your goal, and if anything isn't sort of leading you to that goal, it could be something you should cut so that the experience is more clear, the experience is more engaging and more focused. Not including game designers and learning specialists throughout is a common mistake. It's like getting game designers at the end, or pulling learning in later, or like that whole, like I said, like it's a lot of fun. Let's just add some math to it, and it'll be a learning game. Or like we've got really solid math concept. Let's just make it fun. Just adding badges. Badges are really popular. A lot of people are trying to think of using badge systems. Talking about Facebook games, sometimes you're just collecting because you were online for 10 hours. And you got badge for that. So just adding badges isn't necessarily the best way to track learning or to reward what people are doing. Like I was saying earlier, an online game, once it's online, that's actually the start of a new phase of the game. You have a community developing, so you usually want to have some attention there. That means personnel, most likely. Another common mistake is not having any sort of sense of how to distribute after you've made the game, like where to put it, how to share it out with people so they understand what's going on. That's actually being addressed pretty cleverly by a lot of, like, Brain Pop's starting to do some stuff, Common Sense Media is starting to do some stuff. The Learning Game Network, a spinoff out of MIT, so some places are starting to offer avenues for when you have a game, like here's a venue for you, and they sort of will vet the game. But we notice a lot of people have something that's really clever and it might work, but it's just in a void or in a vacuum. And then last but not least, that a game and a transformational game's easy, cheap, and quick. It's like we can get it done in 3 months for no money, and kids will love it. So to balance those mistakes, we had some recommendations. A good way to think about, is a game even the best thing to do, is there anything playful or game-like about your topic that could help sort of start thinking about how a game could be a good avenue for that exploration. Another recommendation, and not to keep hammering it home, like lots of small playable prototypes help you find what works more readily than trying to bank it all on one. Playtesting is really important, and that helps you get that feedback so you iterate towards success. Games are hard. You want them hard, but it's appropriately challenging that's important. And I think that's true of learning in general. Having it challenge, scope to somebody's mastery level makes it a lot of fun. Having the entire team on board the whole time, we highly recommend that. It does add some cost, but having them engaged. And another thing, a lot of people, in terms of the behavior specialists we had in the academic consortium, are like, allow players to have transgressive play. Let them explore. One of the best things, this happened to me, I was working in the industry in the 90s in Austin, Texas, and we made a training simulation for warehouse safety. And players were pretty sure what to do right when they're playing. Like one of the scenarios was you're at lunch, and your buddy's like, look, 2-for-1 beer. Have some. And then after lunch, you're driving the forklift. And they all were like, I know I shouldn't have beer, but what would happen if I did? And so it's like a safe way to explore mistakes. So allowing that actually I think it reinforces the learning. So it's great, particularly with kids. But these were like adults in warehouses, and they just wanted to see what would happen. So to kind of wrap it up, what I think is really powerful about and can be successful about a transformational game, something where you want to have some impact, through and beyond the game, is that it gives us agency, gives us as players agency, so we feel like what we're doing matters, and that happens through the gameplay, through the setting, through the content, all of that combined together. So it's a wonderful recipe that you pull together. That interdisciplinary blend, though, makes it pretty challenging to do. And so it's easy to not do it well. There's a lot of bad games out there. And the internet just means there's more of them. What is it, 90% of everything's crap? There's just a larger 90% now. But when you actually see these games start working, it's just wonderful to see as experiences come together and you see students or players or kids developing competencies and getting motivated by the challenges they find in games, and then having it, if it's really well designed, it actually gets them to have an impact outside into their daily lives. So we've seen some of that, and that's what's really powerful. Wanted to provide some resources for you all, just in terms of anything that, as you think about having games in your portfolio, think about doing specific calls for games. This is just the start of a list. I should be, in terms of books, organizations, and conferences, but this, after a group in the consortium, this is sort of like a quick high level. There's plenty more out there, but we've got some great books. There's some organizations, key organizations that kind of work in this area. Some great discussion lists. Some more active than others, but I've noticed this community is very actually friendly right now. So you could get on these discussion lists and ask questions, and you'll get a lot of answers. And then we wanted to end and also end with the list of the consortium members, but also a thank you to all the consortium members. They helped pull all of this together to help share with you all. And thanks to Constance for requiring us, making us, asking us. But it was actually an interesting exercise because for a lot of us, it was like, yeah, we actually talk about this. And now, like internally at Carnegie Mellon, we're like, yeah, we're going to use this because we work with clients all the time. So this will help just do a little bit of client management, help set expectations and stuff like that. And so we hope this is a nice resource for you all. And I've shared it digitally, both the PDF and the PowerPoint, so that you all have the information long term. And you're more than welcome ever to get in touch with me if you like. But I won't give you my email. No, I will. It's true. No.
Maybe we can open it up. Maybe we can open it up to some general discussion and questions. Like, I wonder as you sort of walk through some of the more just sort of bigger trends in games, like how they're developed, cost estimates. I wonder, like, where people see intersections, good or bad. You know, are there particular areas that are more challenging than others that you feel like the typical grant procurement process makes very, very difficult? Or observations on having done this in the past and have wounds and scars to tell from it? Yeah.
I mean, just because we're webcasting, we'll get you a mic just so people can hear.
So Marianne Yerkes from USAID. So one question with the ideation phase, do we have examples of good documents, like the level of detail you need from funders or publishers, only impact objectives? Is there anything like that that kind of shows what game developers need in order to move forward, or is it more just a lot of back and forth? I know in our experience, we didn't even have the topic identified yet because we wanted to work with our offices in the field. But then it was a lot of trying to figure out what they needed from us in order to move forward, and then what would the role of the subject matter expert would be working with the game development team. So just like if there are any samples of the level of detail that usually is useful for game developers to have in order to move that forward.
I know I could. I bet we could ask some of the other people in the consortium to supply that. I've noticed two things will happen with clients in general. This might be really in general. It's sort of like it's blue sky. Anything's going. It's just got to be civics. We want kids to be more civically engaged. Or it's like, I know exactly what I want to do. And, so it's almost too constraining here and too open here. And so, like, that back and forth sometimes in the middle helps that happen. And as much as I was stressing that the importance of interdisciplinary, anytime you do interdisciplinary, often people are talking past each other. And that's just, even on a game development team that has no serious goals, just artists and programmers speak different languages. And then you pull in a subject matter expert, and it adds another, group of jargon to the mix.
Can I ask one more question just on the assessment role, so the M&E assessment role, I guess. What type of person is that? Is that someone that is a basic strong person in evaluation related to the subject matter that you're talking about, or is there a specific expertise in evaluation and games? Someone who understands the gaming environment and how you assess, because in our case, I didn't know the answer to that, so we were working initially with a general kind of monitoring and evaluation person who understands international development programs, but didn't understand the game. So they were
Right.
So like, what does that role look like, and what's most effective?
That's actually evolving, I think, and Constance might be able to speak to this more than myself in some ways. Like, I've seen it coming out of certain schools like hers with learning science focus, where they're getting that fundamental idea of how learning occurs, but they're not scared of games, and that combination means that they get it. Like somebody like Valerie Shute out of Florida, she's an assessment expert. So there are some people who that's their thing, is how to assess is what they know. I mean, I think she'd call herself either an expert or even a designer of assessment modeling. And I think that's fair to say. Another thing that's happening right now too is MacArthur and Gates partnering with the Institute of Play and Electronic Arts has formed Glass Lab. And it's a lab specifically focused on assessment and games. Because in some ways, games are optimal assessment systems in and of themselves. Like, if you've won the game, you've proven that you understood how to play it. Now layer in learning goals or civic goals, or that's a whole other ball of wax. But they're like, I was just talking to the creative director of the Glass Lab, and he was just like, wow, assessment's a tough nut. And he's coming from a game background. And so right now it's kind of evolving in terms of what that means, particularly with games, I think. But there's some people out there that are doing some of the cutting edge work, and I think Val's one of them, and Glass Lab's probably
Yeah, I think it's definitely Constance Squire. I think it's definitely an issue on the horizon. I think there's actually a whole new generation developing because both assessment organizations on the one end, and then commercial and impact game companies on the other are finding that the data exhaust from games are a really rich space to be in. So I think that that sort of intersection that you're keying on is a really big one. But I think that we're just starting to see, I would almost argue that like you're seeing a new generation of scholars start to focus on it. So I can point to a lot of them very young, you know, like doing their dissertation on learning analytics within, you know, embedded simulation environments. I mean, some really cool stuff, but I would say like 5 years from now, that's going to be a huge topic.
Like right here, this is a book that I think's in press, the last one by Maggie, Game Analytics. That's like she's just cutting edge stuff of like not only how through gameplay and game mechanics, but just since it's a digital experience, how it can track for you in some ways.
Other questions, comments, issues, discussion, examples, non-examples?
Alice Maya, the National Endowment for the Arts. Are most of the assessments geared towards K through 12, or is there are people really looking at the impact on adults who play games?
I've seen a lot of the funding in K through 12, and so we see a lot of the most recent work there. But I was kind of half joking, but we have done some stuff with adults, and they have different play patterns. I know mine's are. I don't have time to play long experiences anymore. So just personally, it's interesting to watch, you know, myself compared to my students. But there's definitely much more in K through 12. Although we're starting to see some in undergrad. We're trying to tackle a project just in terms of making a game to help kids develop lifelong critical thinking skills. Although some people think that's a bad thing, but I vehemently disagree. I know, exactly. And so just because of your background too, I was thinking not only just assessment, but also one of the things that I would love to see more of is how games can help with evocative experiences. Everybody's thinking about it for STEM. You know, oh, it's a physics game. That all makes sense, but what could you do for art and humanities? And I find that fascinating. I think there's a lot of things possible there that haven't been explored as deeply yet. But I would love to do that.
I have to say, given your interest, though, that like right now the indie game scene is really starting to explore games as a medium. You're seeing a really robust community of artists that I think for a variety of historical reasons, the game production tools have gotten cheap enough to where you can have exploration of that space by a lot of different hands. I think that the indie scene is full of just some really young, brilliant designers who that has always been their medium. They're not leaving a different visual medium and then finding games, so they're sort of completely versed in it and steeped in it from the very, very beginning. But I could probably point, between the two of us, I bet we could point to 50 games right now that are really interesting as just evocative experiences. And I think it's exciting to see the medium start to get explored that way. So if you want
There's some great things like on meditation of loss, some interesting games that come out of the indie sphere. Like Tracy Fullerton's done some wonderful work just in her lab. And so, but not only the cost of production, but also the cost of distribution is so low now. So
In fact, we funded one of Tracy's games, the Walden Pond game.
Yeah.
And so we're getting I shouldn't say a lot, we're getting a number of applications in. However, for us, because we're not able to fund individual artists, there's no way, or there's a limited way that an independent gamer can apply to us. If they're university-based, yes, But if they're, your basic independent game developer, they're not able to apply to us.
We've done something like similar, like when we partner, like, hey, you can come to us and we're CMU. You can, but usually that's like, oh, and then we partner with a high school for the physics.
And I think one
10th
of
grade.
the issues is also to stop thinking about games as a standalone and think about games as part of a sort of a media universe.
Yeah.
So we were just up at the Toronto Film Festival. I had somebody up there. We do a lot of work with news media, sort of the idea of data-driven journalism. Can we actually use games to create a cohort of people out there that have a different understanding of the world on the basis of playing the game and create journalistic narratives around those folks?
And we get those kinds of applications.
Yeah, you might get them as well, right?
Coming from, it's coming out of documentary or coming out of music or dance. And so it is not necessarily a game for game's sake or a game about art, but it's a media extension of a piece of media that already exists.
So I think the bundling is a huge potential there. But I think the bundling also changes a little bit about the assessment equation. And all of the equations change a little bit as soon as I link the game with journalism.
That's right.
Because if I'm a journalist, okay, I have a different set of metrics. And if I'm using a game as part of driving a journalistic narrative, then I've got to figure out how to sort of figure out the game evaluation narrative, and also sort of how am I being evaluated as somebody in the journalistic space. If I'm a filmmaker, the same thing applies. So I think at some level it makes the evaluation maybe more fun, more challenging, more complex. But I think it also opens up the entire space in terms of funding, in terms of impact, because I think there's just going to be an incredible amount of blending that a lot of the game people are just moving across into films, into journalism, and vice versa. There's people coming into those spaces saying this is an incredible way of sort of restructuring what we do, rethinking it, changing the audiences. But I think for people funding it, it's going to be, probably for the federal agencies funding it, might be even trickier. And it opens up big opportunities for you, for the arts and humanities folks. But I think a lot of the opportunities might not be as obvious for the science-based agencies, but they're there, I think.
Like I noticed the Tribeca Film Festival funded transmedia last year and this year. And so it's just interesting, like not just short films, how do you get interactivity involved in that and get people to engage on different levels? And I think there's so much in terms of power and engagement. Like you just see it when it's used for marketing and the crazy fans for the new Batman film. But then you start thinking about how it could be used in other ways to get people to engage across their lives and bring the learning in the game into their life and having, it's almost more seamless.
Adam Norwich from MIT Lincoln Laboratory. I just want to comment on kind of the use of the games. And what we're doing at the Lincoln Laboratory is we've been building games for a variety of different fields. But that mindset has changed where we first started looking at building game as kind of like that was the end point. We would build this game and it would be used in some operational community. But we're now starting to use games as part of the process for building technology, right? So if we're building something that's going to be used by operators, right? There's this human element. Games have a very strong component in the whole life cycle of the R&D process, which I think that's, people can latch on to that much easier in our domain than just saying, oh, what am I supposed to do with this game? Like, how do I run it? But as part of the R&D process, it's much more attractive. And I think that relates to some of the topics here.
Yeah, we've used like first passes at something to help stimulate more funding because we'll get something that's playable and be able to then show that something's happening. And
Ori Hoffer, GSA. The federal digital strategy is calling for sort of opening up data and making all the data more accessible to the general public. How are sort of everyone here looking at their data in combination with game development, where maybe it's just if the data is structured in such a way, it's just out there and someone else will develop the game for you? Anyone?
Thanks, Steve. One of the things we haven't gotten to in our housekeeping is that we actually had our first full meeting of the National Science and Technology Council Subcommittee on Digital Game Technology, which is co-chaired by Health and Human Services, NASA, and DARPA. And one of the questions that came up is how do we make data more accessible? And we're looking at the idea that while there's a lot of data out there that we think of at agencies as accessible, it's not necessarily clear to the people who would use it that it's actually accessible. So we're looking at can we start looking for guides that would point that data to people. And no one jumped at the answer of we'll spend a lot of money to translate that data into different formats that other people will use more easily. It was how do we get that together for people.
A quick update on that, too, is that there's a new think tank that just emerged, which is looking for its name. I think the last time we looked at it was like Serious Games Regroup or something like that. But there's a subgroup within that, Mark DeLaura and a couple other insiders from industry that have actually volunteered to go and pour through. If you've gone to like data.gov, it's a fairly daunting activity. So he's assembled sort of an action group to go and take just a dive through it and give some recommendations on where the sweet spots seem to be and if there are any big barriers. So I think what we could do is think about having them report back to this group as a way to move forward that sort of recommendation set. That might be an interesting way to kind of move it along and connect to it.
If I could just make a comment on the data sharing item. This is Rita Bush from IARPA. One thing that we have to be very careful about is a lot of this data that is federally funded and sponsored research may involve human subjects data collection, which is covered under IRB's informed consent. And if you are planning on sharing data outside of the original research teams, the human subjects participants must be informed of that in advance and sign up to that. Otherwise, you're not sharing data.
I mean, I think some of you heard me make this plea before, but I think it's important not to look at the government just as a source of data, right? Because I think that's a very truncated view. So if I look at the government, yes, they've got historical data, they've got projections. One of the most valuable things the government has is peer-reviewed models and algorithms. So no data interacts in a game without going through some mathematical model. And frankly, a lot of the game folks are not very good at having their models peer-reviewed.
Yeah.
Frankly. Right. And so if I'm trying to figure out, how do I have a game where the forest fire is spreading or a flu, I can show you models from the Forest Service or CDC that have been peer-reviewed by 20 or 30 people. So the actual value of the government is not just in the data. It's historical data, it's projections, it's the models. I think the other thing is very deep content understanding, at least as deep and maybe deeper than you'd find in academia. I'm not putting academics down, but there's a huge amount of knowledge in the government. So we just went through an update of the national budget game and spent most of the data and most of the knowledge came from the CBO and the Congressional Research Service that were willing to spend hours with us. The other thing is imagery. If you're looking for imagery, NASA's got it. The National Archives have it. The Smithsonian have it. Some of the greatest imagery in the world is sitting in publicly accessible archives. Another thing the government has, if it wants to use it, is the bully pulpit. Right? That's quite often politically difficult. But so I think, when you think about the government, I think, the data is an issue. That the point about human subjects is important, but the resources are massive. I would look at it in terms of projections, certainly expertise, algorithms, models that could be integrated into games, enormous imagery banks. There's just a lot there, and that actually makes this issue of finding your way around somewhat harder. But I think if you can actually find guides, I was sort of think about this. There's a set of guides in the government, certain people that kind of know where this stuff is and know some of the issues. They could just take people on the outside, whether they're academics or industry folks, around and sort of say, okay, if you need this, this is where it is at, and this is how you can get it. And these might be the sharing issues. But I think there's an enormous amount of stuff there that we could mine.
I mean, two things that cut you reminded me, like Electronic Arts just partnered with some agency so that all the mountains in their latest snowboarding game were actually accurate to the
USGS.
yeah, right, USGS, yeah.
The topographic data.
Yeah, a ton.
It's
NASA data?
Okay.
And it wasn't
Oh,
partnered.
NASA.
They went out and found the data
Oh, it was
themselves.
free.
It was just sitting out there.
I misspoke.
It was only 30% of their mountains.
And
Oh,
that was what, from radar, right? It was the satellite.
It was TDRS
Yeah.
data,
Oh.
satellite data.
Cool.
Turns out to be cheaper to use. Can I have a microphone?
Just speak to it.
It turns out to be cheaper to use real mountain data that's already been generated by a satellite collecting it than to make up a mountain from scratch in your own software. So it saves budget, and NASA goes, yay, people used our stuff. That's what it's sitting there for. But the concept of having a guide, somebody who knows, is one of the things we were looking at. We've discussed on how to get the data out there. And I think creativity on how to partner with the government is vital. There's a tendency, and not to point fingers at academics, even if I got tarred and feathered on slash.org being a moron. Anyway, that you could partner with the federal government without the government actually pouring money into your pocket. That the government has lots of resources, has knowledge of where things are, has models, has images, and if you look at the value of that and partnering with the government, you've got a lot of options, especially as we are looking at budgets being slashed. For getting value out of government without just asking the government for a check. And right now, I don't think there's any agency in the government that wouldn't be happier to do something cooperative than write you a check.
Yeah, because sometimes time is so valuable to get. And it also one of the things I haven't seen yet, just talking about data, is the idea of like big data connecting with game design. Like the way Google constantly is A/B testing with their search results. So pretty much anytime you go to Google, you're participating in a public beta test so they refine their search. If you could do something like that with the scale of millions of people with a game too, it'd be interesting to see what happens.
I've actually seen a presentation by a economist at Harvard who's working with, I don't know if it's Google, but one of the companies and all of their search data. And she actually said something similar to what you were saying, Connie, that essentially the theory doesn't really exist to figure out how to use this massive amount of data. And then in every project, she kind of has to think through herself what to do. And that if she were advising a young graduate student in economics, she would say, work on the statistical or econometric or whatever things for creating and thinking through how to use all this data. So anyway, and I think that stuff will.
You know, it's interesting that this topic has been raised again because it has come up frequently in the last year. There's a lot of interest in this issue, but trying to figure out what's a good way to organize a conversation around it. And if anyone has ideas on that, I would be very interested in figuring out how we might go about it, because I feel like there's interest both on the industry side and there's interest on the agency side. But, while I can send Mark and a team of experts to go look at the data and give recommendations, trying to think of a more facilitated way to have a conversation about how to execute something like that would be really valuable. I mean, not only, for example, this has come up in issues around like some of the city models that we have that are governmental data. I know that Canada did that with Vancouver quite effectively because, again, what's more interesting than getting the real city in your game than a fictional city? So if there's any interest in this group, I mean, it would be great to see if we could figure out a way to, I guess, to turn that into some sort of operationalized action group instead of, every time it comes up, I have a hard time figuring out how to get traction on it because it's big. It's really, really a big topic. So volunteers, let me know. Any other issues we want to discuss related to Drew's best practices? Yeah. Great.
Thanks. Rita Bush from IARPA again. On the comment that you made about releasing a game without PR and a distribution plan, this is a real tough one for government agencies where your primary target audience is agency employees, and you're trying to distribute a game across government networks and get them on government PCs and platforms, which is what I'm trying to do with the research program that I'm managing. So I haven't figured this one out yet. If anyone has any bright ideas about that particular challenge, the thing that I'm thinking that may be the method is what I call games as homework. So I'm trying to get into the various schoolhouses and get with instructors who are forward-thinking and willing to perhaps use a game as part of a curriculum, and I'll provide the PC if that doesn't have to be connected to a government network, if that's what it takes, and then we'll get them, CDs or URLs that the students, once they get hooked, can go home and play games as homework. That's about the best thing I've been able to come up with so far as a PR and distribution plan. I welcome other ideas.
This is Ori from GSA again. There is a federal social media group that has a subgroup on OMB Max and is very active. Obviously, they're the people who can create that distributed network that will then expand exponentially, and that would be a great way to, and it tends to be, the younger, forward-thinking, we want to try everything now. We don't want to wait for the government to catch up to what we want to do. So if a game came out from a government group and was looking for distribution, that's a great group of people to hit. There's also a weekly White House call from the Office of Technology, I think, and they also distribute. When there are new things that come through there, they distribute it out to its list. And when things come from the White House saying, "Could you please, expand upon this and pass this around?" people tend to listen. I will get that for you, and for anybody else here who's interested.
Yeah, like for us, we almost rely. Like you asked the question, I was like, I would need to know. We've had problems with schools, and then we're totally trying to figure out how to work with them to help us get it out. If we're trying to get something into like a school district or something like that, it's usually we're relying on them to help us get it out. Often we've noticed with smaller things that you're just hoping to do an informal learning that you want to share out. It's finding those partnerships. Like I think MacArthur's doing some interesting stuff with their hives and their learning networks. So if something's within that network of institutions and groups working together, it can get spread across that network. And since it's got the MacArthur name on it, people listen.
Is the problem that you can't install it at the school, or if the computers just aren't good enough to run it at the schools?
Usually the former first, because we'll talk to them about what computers they have and then try to make sure we're scoping something that'll work for them. But usually it's just like trying to get a sense of their IT so we can help them get it out, within their structure.
We spend a lot of time trying to identify what the right technology would be to use, because even if it would run on the computers, that no one's allowed to install anything, right? And so we try to get like a certificate of networthiness and that kind of thing for people. One of the things that I've been really interested in is like the idea of using something like OnLive or Gaikai, which is where the games actually just stream, and then we could just get one client approved and run the computers on like a back-end server system somewhere, like run all the games on back-end. Yeah. Though we've looked into it, but we haven't been able to actually do anything with that yet.
Yeah, I just remember when Little Big Planet first hit and it got so popular using schools, but that meant you had to have a PS3, which wasn't cheap. And it's its own piece of technology. So a nice thing, like we've had a lot of fun with Connect because it's something that kids don't have to touch. So it doesn't break as easily.
I should have said Daniel Laughlin. I'm with, not from NASA. I'm the one who sends out the invitation. So if you're here, you've got my email. And Constance should have said earlier her OSTP White House email doesn't work anymore, and we'll be getting another email out for Constance. She is still working with us on behalf of the White House. But my question is, when my game developer and my instructional design developer are both absolutely sure they're right and that their way has to be the way the game is developed, how do I settle that, Drew?
That's an art.
The question was when members of your team, Drew said in his presentation, and I agree with him, that you want to get in everybody that you can who's going to be involved in the process right from the beginning. But you tend to have very strong opinions. The game developer tends to feel that game design must lead the process. The instructional designer feels instructional design must lead the process. And if you've got two strong-willed people, and you've probably got a shortage of strong-willed people if you only got two, but if you got two of them in the same group, how do you settle their disputes? How do you decide? Who makes that call of which way you're going to go?
Yeah. That's like a higher level management issue in some ways. Like what we've tried to do, it is two things that we've tried to do is one, use the goals as what's most important. And around the Entertainment Technology Center, everybody's required to take improv. So everybody goes through improv, whether they're a programmer, an artist, a business person. And so that becomes a great way for us to refer to what's important and how you do that together. And so the most important thing, like with an improv, and it's visceral, so it's painful when it doesn't work. It's the thing you're making together as a group, and you have to play nice with each other, and you have to share, and you have to serve the narrative. So there are all these really explicit rules that help make improv work, and I'm sure some of us have seen improv when it works. It's just magical. And if you're a part of it and it's working, it feels like it's outside of yourself, because it is. And so that becomes a great, powerful metaphor for us, not just in terms of brainstorming in general, but in terms of helping resolve egos and ideas. It's like this thing we're making together only works if we're making it together. And so that's what's most important. And then as you work on that thing in the middle, that's where we try to make our decisions. And also, me personally, anytime somebody's certain, I just know they're wrong. Doubt just makes me trust somebody a little bit better. Not that they're wrong, but come on.
The cognitive literature, by the way, backs you up. Feeling of certainty has nothing to do with how right you are.
Right. Usually it's the opposite.
10,000 years ago, I used to produce television and worked for what was then Children's Television Workshop, Sesame Workshop. But essentially, it's the same model that and they used to refer to it as a three-legged stool. And I did 3-to-1 contact, and so I had a science content expert. Then, of course, I was the producer, and then we had a research team that, Sesame invented, research with children in media, basically. Mm-hmm. And so everyone was coming with equal power. And we had to, negotiate, and everything required a negotiation, but it also required a mutual respect. And you came to the table, knowing that everyone was an expert, but you had to really convince them of why what you were doing, you were not writing a book, you were creating a TV show. You were not doing, a science experiment, but you needed to embed the science within the project. So it's interesting to me that now, once again, we're reliving those kinds of things, in the game space, but essentially it's the same thing, and it requires a three-legged stool, and for everyone to respect that.
We often talk about orchestration. It's like a verb. It's like everything's orchestrated together. And so if somebody's trying to stand out, it might, literally with music, it's obvious. But improv as well. But it's, sometimes just on a team, it's getting 90 people together to do, or 300 people together to do something. It's wonderful when it works, but it's a process. I bet 90% of my mentoring and advising is we're having a problem communicating. And I love it when students say, we've solved our communication issues. I'm like, well, it's a process. They'll fall apart tomorrow. And you fix them again.
So how does this work in kind of a virtual space? I mean, I don't know if for your team, if you're physically there to be able to do these improv things together, and I don't know the correct terminology, if it's a distributed team or something, but I mean, especially for those of us working internationally, you might have parts of the team in different places and locations. So what are good examples of how to work in that environment? Are there points within the process where people have to come together? You know, I mean, some of my questions are very mundane. You know, it's like for a funder, is there a time when we need to review it? Or the subject matter expert, if it's on civic engagement, are they a part of that kind of core team? And how do they engage if they're in different places? Are there points, like some way to kind of indicate that this is where a subject matter expert would engage? Or just thinking about when you don't have everyone under, you know, together, how that works.
One of the things that we've done, I think it's really powerful. Like, so you've got to schedule it. Like, we haven't done it in a year. A kickoff meeting is a great thing to have everybody together if you can afford it. So, like, getting everybody into one place so that they kick off together and get some sort of investment involvement just from the get-go. And then weekly Skype's, you know, you get what you pay for, but just having something where you have facial is really powerful, at least once a week. And sometimes we've done things like a magic mirror with Skype, where like they're working and they share sort of core hours where they keep Skype on in both places, so they're kind of able to talk to each other, and that can help too. So they sort of bond, even if they're in two different offices and around the world, they can at least see each other through Skype and like ping each other. Usually they work out etiquette, like I'll text before I yell to try to get somebody's attention, but then they can have a quick off the cuff conversation pretty readily, and that can be really powerful if they're really a team working together, like day in and day out, so they're developing together. Sometimes in terms of like client subject matter expert / development team, and they need to work together, but they're not interfacing every day. IM can be really impactful. And then if, like you say, you have that year, you do that kickoff, weekly Skypes, and maybe like we do things that we call dailies, stolen from the idea of agile development cycle, where you're just sort of keeping in touch. Here's what I did today. Here's what I'm doing tomorrow. Here's my challenges.
It's so like the subject matter person. So if we're talking about learning, like say it's a game on civic engagement, and you have someone who understands civic engagement in the Middle East, let's say, how would that person engage? I can say that the way it's worked to date was she would talk with the game designer or developer, I don't know, sorry, but and have a long conversation, but then it didn't get integrated into the design. So it's like, how does that work in terms of that level of subject matter understanding? Is it?
We find it, if you can have them there regularly, that's the most effective. If it's not, she's in the Middle East, and then being much more managing the process better. So you get the feedback to the game designer, and you have a checkpoint after that. So like, she's giving this feedback that she finds really important. She's the expert. She should know. A week later or 2 weeks later, however long they think it's going to take to integrate, then you have a checkpoint where she checks back in and goes, "Oh, I see what you're trying to do there." And if not, and so you kind of manage that out across time.
Would it be like a game design document? Are there the clear moments in the process where you could say, okay, that's where you have to ensure that the subject matter expert has?
I mean, for us, our sweet spot around the center is doing 15-week projects with graduate students just tackling something quick. And so we make sure when they have something playable, that subject matter expert is looking at it so they can play it and then get a sense of, oh, their idea totally didn't come across, or this has happened where the team just misunderstood their idea. It was written and then they put it into play, and oh no, that's not what they wanted.
Right. This is where Drew mentioned the rapid prototyping and the iterative process. This is alien to the way we do projects in government, where it's plan it, start working, and will be done the last day. It's got to be done a different way. And whether you're talking about a distributed team, a virtual team, the important word in there is team. Not the distributed, not the virtual, not the remote. If you let people start thinking of themselves as individual teams who only come together periodically, you lose the whole dynamic of a team. You've got to have people on the idea that they're the team, so that the developer can call the expert or send an email and know that they don't just have to touch base once every 6 weeks, that there really is a sense of team. And then it breaks down very quickly. It doesn't matter how remote you are. You're all part of the same team. So emphasize the team rather than the remote or the virtual.
We do that with clients because, like, we've had clients go like, oh, they're funding our students to work on something, and they'll see them at midterms. And then the students are like, what do we do?
Right, and
They,
and,
it feels like they don't even care.
and to interact, when you're part of the team, if your expert is part of the team, then the expert doesn't feel bad going, well, that's not how I meant it. This is what I wanted to see. Whereas if they're just coming in at the last minute or just checking in, they're going to say, oh, well, that's not what I meant, but they put a lot of work into this. I don't want to criticize. So we'll be much more critical of people on our team when we feel like we're regular team members.
David Rajewski had to step out, our host, but he did say that if we want to go a little bit longer, we can, although for most of us, our schedules are a little bit packed in tight. I do want to first let me thank Drew for coming all the way in and presenting this work. We have the digital documents, and thanks for sharing your contact as well. I think it's incredibly important that we start making some of these connections and have people on call. I don't know. Drew is not available every hour of the day, but he can also point us to his vast network of people who have specific expertise or are working on projects on topics like civic engagement. There's a handful of people that are worth connecting to that can help.
I do have cards. I'm happy to share if anybody wants one.
That's great. I want to, before we completely wrap up and everyone disperses, so right now we're thinking about monthly meeting. We can shift to every 2 months, but for a variety of strategic reasons, would love to keep it on a monthly basis through at least December to make sure we get in lots of content. I'll leave it there. When I had talked to David Rajewski about this, one issue that he and I, about hosting these, and some of the conversations that we've had, one of the topics that seems to have come up, and it's been across every game meeting I've had in the last couple months, and that has been, it came up at the academic consortium around, there's an incredible sort of lack of connection between, so distribution channels are much cheaper now, right? But there's this valley of death between the kinds of games that we fund and then them ever sort of being in the market, on the market in some substantial way. And of course, it's painful on both ends, right? But one thing that's come up frequently in these conversations I've been having recently has been that while there are distribution channels like the App Store and various pseudo-popular websites or Brain Pop and other sort of venues for serious type apps and technologies and games in particular, that we really don't have a very clear understanding of marketing. So, you'll have I will have conversations, for example, with designers or funders who will say things like, well, we will produce this game and then it will go viral, right? With no understanding, right? And I get it, but with no understanding that in order for something to go viral, that I can point to like 5 people in Silicon Valley who are the experts on exactly what design choices you make within the medium to make something, quote, go viral, right? So thinking about how do you get a piece of technology designed for impact to actually have impact by actually getting into a market. And it's interesting, my background is academics in the last year in the White House, so marketing is not my area of expertise. In fact, I'm fairly sure that my academic training makes me completely orthogonal to any kind of marketing thing I can think of. On the other hand, I wonder if this might not be an interesting topic for us at least to bring in maybe a short series of speakers or something to better tool ourselves up on understanding what are the strategies and resources, a variety of ways that we could think about getting these technologies we're investing in off the shelf in non-magical fairy dust ways, but also being very sober about what are the actual costs for that, because I have real concerns about what the costs of marketing may be. And there's viral marketing is just an example. I think there's a couple different sort of key areas of expertise that we could probably snag and bring in to get a better scope. I think my goal here would not be that somehow we all magically add a marketing budget to our grants, which is next to impossible. I think instead the goal would be something like, it may be very useful for us to better understand what those mechanics look like and to know who to ask, or at least which questions to ask. When we're reading a grant, for example, that says something like viral marketing, to know that that's not fairy dust and it doesn't magically happen, but like what that may look like, right? So I'm sort of using that as an example. Now, are there other topics that we want to make sure that we get on our docket, or would perhaps people be more comfortable if we said within the next week we solicit ideas for what you'd like to see in short order on the agendas. Because I want to be very, very careful to bend the next couple months toward the key issues we want to make sure that we can tool ourselves up on. And keep in mind that I still would like to see some form of event put in place. So I think we have some planning around that, but I almost don't want to take this meeting to do it. I'm selfish, and I'd like to use it for our own selfish good. So would it be better if we do it sort of offline and have people just, let's do that. That way people can chew on the idea. So if you could, your homework would be to, A, thank Drew. Now we're done. But B, so think about what topics you'd like to actually have included in short order in this meeting, what you want to accomplish. And if we can do that within the next week, let's send a reminder out for people to just send us 3 of your top ideas. And then we'll aggregate them, figure out which ones we can execute, and send them back out as agenda items. Sound good? All right. Thank you tremendously for coming. Thank you.
Yeah, especially for those people on the webcast and everyone who Constance has now assigned homework. Mine, daniel.d.laughlin@nasa.gov, is an email that all of you should have in your inbox from getting your invitations. I'll be sending out a reminder as well as a link to where we'll be able to get the archives when we've got it. And please send your suggestions for the meeting, and I'll take the ones I like and pass those on to Constance as good ideas. And everybody on the webcast is now free to turn off.
To what? Go back? Oh yeah, she had a good. I brought her in there.
Wow.
So if the 2 years, you want to go home.
Yeah, it's a great rotation. Well, yeah, I mean, I did the same thing. I was like, it's been a year. I heard some conversation about.
So what are the right evaluation? You're clearly stating.
No, I mean, engaged, yes. So what I've done,
Is Dan now the
so Daniel is our lead fearless leader right now.
I always was.
It's true, he always was. No, so, you know, they kind of asked for December, and I talked to him about it, and
But what I would love to do is, I know you're very, very busy, but what I would love to do is
I'll go home and open it.
and ask you for 5 minutes
So I have to go.
to just go.
But I have promised them
Consistent with the
that, so
presentation, and I'm actually going to look at your presentations. I don't know if it's been forwarded electronically.
Right.
Okay, if it hasn't, I'm happy to share it too.
I would like that both in PDF and PowerPoint, because there's a couple of people from my rubric team that I want to make sure get their eyeballs on it.
Yeah.
I would forward it.
Yeah,
to
and I
you
said,
just
you know,
say,
until,
hey,
you know, for the next,
Yeah, I can do that for sure.
you know,
on
at
what
home,
appears to
my
be
husband and I
blatantly
co-directed
missing
some
or
things.
misaligned
But,
or
you know, for the next couple of months,
semi-consistent, because I know you're busy.
you
and
know,
I
like
don't
as
want
long
you to
until,
vet
you know,
through it to do
so
that.
through December, I
happy to do that.
have arranged
Okay,
things.
I would greatly appreciate
Yeah.
that. Again, Karen Cooper from the Navy, so you'll see my email come in.
All right, cool.
Okay?
All right.
Thank you.
Keep the plate spinning.
going home and
No, I'm home. I get to take my
Bliss.
children in every night. Yeah, my 2.5-year-old. So I had to leave very early this morning. But last night I took him to shed. He's so cute. I'm like shampooing hair. And he goes clunk 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 clunk. And my 2-year-old's going, here you go, mama. Here you go, mama. And he's taking his toys and he's putting them in the shower for me to go.
That's really sweet.
I know.
That
I
is
was like,
really sweet.
thanks, honey. Thanks for bringing me your whales. And I thought, this is, so to me it's heaven on earth. I mean, I'll still be up here about once a month, twice a month.
But there's nothing like home, and there's nothing like being with your kids.
Yeah, I mean, and
really.
I loved working for the White House. Loved it, you know? And I hope to do it again. Just not when I have a 2.5-year-old and a 5-year-old. You know? I'm like,
Yeah, you were juggling.
yeah. Totoro.
All right, so,
But it's good to see you.
and Sharon was sorry she didn't have time to come
Oh,
and
of
then leave,
course.
so.
You know, I
told her I'd say
know I
goodbye.
have your email. I may try, if you don't mind, I may ping you just so I can get her email
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
tell her bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got 2 questions.
That's
for
kind
you.
of fun though. That's kind of nice. You know, it's
Yeah.
like, oh, she's, yes, what? Yes and yes.
Okay, cool.
I know.
I was going to share out everything to this consortium. We're kind of done. And then for the November meeting, do you want to come a little early or not?
Oh, God, that's right. Okay, so my thing is that I was just question is like, could we come at? If we did that, I think it's me and Kurt both. So you're I think it's gonna be. Isn't he coming?
He said he could. So if he backs out, I'll be calling his wife to say, "What the hell?"
Yeah, I know. I would love to pretend like I have control over my husband, but it turns out.
Hi, nice to meet you. Question.
Okay.
You mentioned a project that I just didn't quite catch. You talked about a project called, where you said it was to develop lifelong critical thinking skills for kids.
Oh, we're doing that's
one of
in
yours?
that's in process right now. We're working with the CMU's philosophy department.
At your CMU's okay.
Yeah, it's kicking off this January.
Okay. Who's funding it?
Currently a trustee of the university.
It's university funded.
Yeah.
And well, so that sounds very relevant to the project that I am working on. That I.
Because I know they're going to be looking for more long-term funding, so I can.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any more money because I just went through. But we might get to the point of starting to share research results because
Okay, happy to do that.
what